Hey guys, this is Mitch with Fine Point CGI, and today we're going to talk about what level design is. We're going to talk about a lot of the concepts that level designers use to build out levels, and we also are going to talk about some of the caveats of level design. Now, this is a part one of probably a two-part series where I'm going to basically encapsulate in, I guess, a teaching format what level design is for you guys, so you guys can take this knowledge forward into your game development careers. So that's what I have in store for you guys today. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the first thing that we need to talk about is what is level design. And level design is the process that deals with creating designs, levels, and missions of a game. The overall purpose of level design is to create events in a game that teaches your player and kind of keeps them playing your game. Now, there are three pillars of level design, and the three major pillars are functional, feel, and fun. And the first one, functional, is how does the game fulfill the requirements? So I have requirements. I need the player to go from point A to point B. I need them to kill some monsters, things like that. You look at it as a critical lens of how does this game fulfill this requirement? How does this level actually fulfill the requirement of doing that? Does it allow them to do the things? Does it allow them to gain the power up? Stuff like that. Then you have feel, and feel is how the game feels to be played. Does it feel good? Does it feel exciting? Is it easy to use? And a lot of times you'd be surprised how many levels feel terrible. A lot of times people get lost, or they don't know what's next, or they get surprised by something that was never ever taught to them or shown to them. So it's something that we need to make sure that it feels good to play. And then finally, is it fun? One of the most important things in any game is to be fun. And if it's not fun, then what's the point in having a level? So those are the three general design principles I try to put into my own levels. And in my experience, these three pillars are usually a good way to start thinking about your level. So what are your goals when it comes to level design? The goals when you're building a level is to teach the player, to transmit your story, and to give guidance. A level space should always teach the player. It should always reinforce something that the player has learned, and you should use the concept of skill gates. A skill gate is basically like when you have learned something, you need to test that that thing actually has been learned. It's kind of like having an exam on a class. You don't just say, here's all this information, and then there you go, you're good to go. You actually get tested on that knowledge, and you need to produce that knowledge and show how it works before you are able to move on to the next step. Dark Souls does this extremely well. In the beginning of the game, the first thing that they do is they say, you hit the L button to attack, you hit the R button to defend, here's an enemy to fight. So you fight the enemy and you kill it, and then you head down further and you'll see that there is a enemy that's shooting arrows at you, and it says, hey, press A to dodge, and then you press A to dodge it, and then you kill the enemy, and then you crest the hill, and right to your left is the first big boss of the game. And he is a skill gate. His job is to make sure that you have the basic requirements of the game figured out. You can dodge, you can attack, and you can block. And as long as you can do those three things, you can defeat the boss. The next big thing is transmission of story. How are you pushing your story to the rest of the players? How are you showing the player what happened? So for instance, if a room is full of bodies and there's blood everywhere, the player can reasonably assume that there was some kind of massacre or something happened where a bunch of people died in this area. And it should provide a context of things to come. If you see a gigantic scratch mark on the side of the wall, that can be a really good indicator of, oh man, there's a big boss coming my way, or there's a big enemy in this level that I have to defeat. And that can help give a transmission of story of what went on in this space. And then finally, it should guide you. A level should always guide the player. you should always try to draw the player into locations. And we'll talk a little bit more about guidance a little bit later, but just like how in Dark Souls, the first thing that you see when you crest that hill is the Firelink Shrine. And then to the left of you is the big boss guy. And you make that mental connection. I want to go there, but I have to go over here and defeat this guy first for me to get there. It sets up that through line of, oh man, that's really cool. I want to see that. So you want to go in that general direction. And that's providing guidance to the player. So here are some rules to live by. Game spaces should follow what came before. So what I mean by that is you should always have something that makes sense. Things, you shouldn't just open up a door and end up in the Siberian desert. You need to actually end up in a location that makes sense, right? If you open up a door, you expect to be a room or some kind of hallway or maybe something like that, or maybe the outside, but you don't expect to open up the door and then suddenly be in the middle of the Siberian desert, right? And you should always try to follow these small principles: dark to light or light to dark, and small to big or big to small. Coming from a dark space into a light space will make it way more impactful than walking from a light room to a light room. Walking from a light room to a dark room will be very impactful and will make your user feel fear or possibly progress. You should always go from small to big. If you go from small to big, it will always make the room feel larger. And it doesn't have to be a tiny room followed by a big room. It just needs to be something like a small hallway. If you can take a small room or a medium-sized room, walk into a small hallway and then up to a large room, then you will have a more impactful room than just walking into a medium-sized room to a large room. If you see here on the left, you can see there is the Ocarina of Time, Temple of Time, and you can see the player comes in and goes up and into this small hallway, and then they walk into this really large room where the sword is located, and that is so impactful. And that's because they shrunk your game space into a small section and then blew it wide open into this huge room for you to be able to see. And that's a huge impact. Now, next, we're going to talk about some design tools that can help you guys out. The first one is molecule design. And molecule design is basically taking up your world and setting it up as nodes. And each node should be like an experience. So if you think about it, you have an entryway, you have a dungeon room, you have a boss room, you have an item room, and then you have an arena where there's a big battle that happens. And if you can really boil your game down to a bunch of small bubbles that says this interconnects with this and this interconnects with this, and the player gets an item here and moves over here, that can really help you get your game to feel better and to be more interesting. Another really cool design tool is Stiner Points. And Stiner Points are basically just a fancy word for shortcuts. It is a intentional or unintentional shortcut that helps the player get to their destination quicker. So if you create a shortcut and the player sees that, you can make it a really impactful experience. So if you look at like Dark Souls, for instance, you'll hear me talk a lot about Dark Souls in here. Dark Souls gives the player a shortcut, and it allows you, after a very large slog through the levels, it'll give you a shortcut that suddenly allows you to open up your world really quickly. You can run directly from your bonfire to the location that you were just at really quickly once you open up that shortcut. And that really is impactful for the player and really helps them feel like they're making progress. And it also means that if you use a shortcut, you can also cut out elements of the game that makes the player feel like they're winning and gaming the system, if that makes sense. The next big design tool is hub spaces, and hub spaces are important. They provide a known rest place for the player. You know, Dark Souls' Firelink Shrine is a very good example. It's a place that allows them to feel at home, and it takes the tension away from the player. You always want to pull the tension away from the player every once in a while, because if you're always tensed up in the game, then the game becomes too stressful and you don't want to play it anymore. Much like how the alien disappears in Alien Isolation, Once the alien disappears, the tension has left the room, and it's a lot easier on the player to be able to move around and investigate the game. And if the alien was always there, that state of fear would be extremely misplaced all of the time. And your player would become normalized, and you wouldn't really want to play the game because it's not that scary anymore. Because the fear of the monster is that it could be there or it couldn't be there, if that makes sense. So, one of the other big design tools that you can do is what's called a weenie. And what in the world is a weenie? Well, a weenie is a landscape marker that draws somebody. So, Disney kind of pioneered this idea with the Magic Kingdom. It's an interesting landmark that draws you in. And you can always see the castle at all times, and it kind of provides you a reference point. You always know where you are in the map, and you always know where you're headed because you see this really cool thing off in the distance, and you go, I want to go see that. And you run off into that distance and you run to go after it. And you can see also with like Dark Souls, for instance, you can see Christmas Town right here, where you see that gigantic castle. And the architecture design is perfect to draw you directly to that castle. I want to go there. That was probably the first thing you saw was the player and then that castle. And that's because it's a weenie. It's an object that makes you go, I want to go there and I want to see what's in that castle. And that's the point of what a weenie is. Now, another really important system that you can use for your game is to use the NPCs to help guide your player. They can block off areas, they can chase the player into locations that you want them to be. So, one of the big, really cool things that Half-Life has done is the first thing you do when you get off the train is you walk forward and there's a guard right there blocking a door. And you're like, I want to go in that door. But the guard shoves you back and forces you to go a different direction. And that's exactly how you can help push the player in specific directions. If you spawn monsters that chases the player and forces them to go down a specific path, that's going to be more impactful instead of just forcing the player to go down a path. That's why chase sequences kind of exist, is that they chase the player and force them out of the area that they were. Or it allows you to make the character backtrack to the hub area really quickly. And it can be extremely useful to help push the player to where you need them to be. Now, the next really big thing that we have to talk about is how to teach the player. And teaching the player is important because when you make a game, the goal is to teach the player how to play your game and how to enjoy your game. And I have two methods to kind of help bring that into light. One of the first ones is the Montessori method, which basically talks about breaking tasks into small elements. It's all about starting simple and progressively getting harder. And I know that that seems like, yeah, logic, right? Duh, of course. We're going to just make it simple and then slowly make it difficult, right? But a lot of games don't actually do this really well. You want to try to make a simple construction puzzle and then make each puzzle harder to teach the player how to actually play your game. You know, you can start with a wall jump and then you can add an obstacle, right? You could jump off this wall, land on the platform, and then you can jump off this wall, dodge a box and land on the platform. Then you can jump off this wall while you're dodging this gigantic saw blade that's trying to kill you, and then jump over the box and land on the platform. And starting off with something simple and then slowly progressing into harder really reinforces the player's skill set and teaches them all about the new elements in your game. Another really important thing is Constructivist method. And the Constructivist method basically is about teaching the player and allowing them to make mistakes and to grow from those mistakes. 343 does this extremely well by having very similar encounters and similar layouts with really generous checkpoints. When you attack a group of grunts, you can look at those grunts and go, okay, I know that if I attack them this way, right, if I just run in there and start shooting them, I know that I'm going to have a rougher time than if I pick them off with my pistol from a distance and kind of come at it more tactically. And that's a thing that you learn with time by going in, having a rough time, dying, and then going back to the checkpoint and starting over. And that allows the player to experiment and they can learn and plan their next encounter. Next is signs, and signs are really important. Signs are something that can teach the player what's up ahead. Portal is an awesome example of signs. If you look over on the right, I have a bunch of different portal symbols, and each one of them actually means something. You have one here for a bridge, you have one here for Gladys, you have one here for a looks like a machine that's going to kill you, another one that's going to kill you, a stomping thing that's going to kill you. You see what I mean? And they all kind of teach you what to expect in that level. They allow you to look at something and go, oh, I know what's up next. Now, it's not to say that you should have a sign that just says, hey, by the way, here's what's up next. You don't necessarily need to make it a direct sign that says this is what's next. You also can make it something simple. Like, for instance, Dark Souls shows a chain on the side of a chest. And if the chain is pointed out towards the player, then it's a mimic. And if it's not and it's curled back, then it's not a mimic. And that's a subtle way to teach the player which one's a mimic. And it's a sign that helps the player understand that that's a mimic. So next up is using color and light. And color and light is really important because it can help guide the player. This is possibly the most important way to guide your player is through color and light. Color draws attention and light directs the player. You always want to go towards the light as the player. You always want to be in light because we as humans do not like to be in the dark. We don't enjoy the dark because it's scary, it's spooky, you know. Using light to kind of help push the player in a specific direction can be really useful. If you see a torch off in the distance, you're going to want to go towards that torch. If you see here, there is light right here in this gigantic pit telling the player this is where you need to go. This is your next direction. As a matter of fact, if you can see on the back of this little area here, there's a light just up here on the left, and that also helped draw the player into that tunnel to have them go into this room. And that's what light's all about. If you look at the level design of Dark Souls or any other game, you will see that light is a predominant way to draw the player into a specific situation. Next is physical symbols. And physical symbols are simple. It's basically just having something do something before you are expected to do it. So have an enemy trigger a trap to teach the player about how that trap works. Watch the mechanics of something happen before the player needs to react to it. Most of the time it's done through something simple. For instance, there's a head on a spike right before a trap where there's a spike trap. It's a really easy way to teach the player, hey, there's a spike trap ahead, or, there's a possibility that you could die from spike traps. And last but not least, use illustrative symbols. Illustrative symbols are something like a writing on walls or a signpost or something that explains to the player what's to come or to get help. Like Half-Life, they use symbols to illustrate danger or to help you. If you ever see the Half-Life symbol on any area of a game, you always know that there's a hidden cache there or there's something there to help you out. And that's what they do to help teach you. You see it, you go, yep, there's something in this area to help me out, and I'm going to go hunt it down. There could be extra enemies, for you to fight against or something like that. But generally speaking, after you get done with the enemies, you can go and collect your rewards and gain your additional experience or your additional items. So illustrative symbols are really useful to help guide the player. It can be as simple as just a giant arrow saying this way, and sometimes that can be really helpful to the player. So in summary, there are 3 pillars of design: functional, feel, and fun. And I know that this is, as always, a hot button issue. So, if you have your own pillars of design, of course, you can go with those. But those are the ones that I go by. The goals of your level is to teach the player to tell a story and to guide the player through that level. You should always try to help the player as much as possible and set up really good expectations. Game spaces should always follow what came before. They should always be consistent, and you should always do small to big, light to dark, dark to light, or big to small. That stuff really helps with making your spaces feel bigger and more dynamic. Show the player something interesting off in the distance and guide them to that experience. Show them the weenie and say, that's where you want to go, and then allow them to go there. If you show them something that's cool, they're going to say, oh man, I have to be there. Like, I have to go and see it. And that is a really good way to keep your player interested. And finally, teach the player by using the world. Don't use pop-ups. If you pop up and just say, hey, here's a really cool thing, here's how you jump off a wall, like, that's really cool, but also show the player how it's done. If you can show the player without telling the player, that will be an experience that they can truly grow and enjoy. Now, I know that this doesn't cover all the concepts, and I would love to cover all of them, so I'm probably going to do a part 2, but I would love your feedback, and I'd love to see if this helped you guys out. And I really hope it did help you guys out, because a lot of times this is the kind of stuff that I was never taught in college, and nobody really showed me why I want to do a thing. So I hope this was helpful, and if you guys have any feedback, please let me know in the comments below. Now, in the next video, I'm going to go ahead and take this and I'm going to actually implement a gray boxed level for our horror game. So look forward to that. But that is all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much again for watching. I'll see you all next time. Thanks.